Recording live from the ARC studios, welcome to the Sustainability Podcast. Our goal is to provide engaging discussions on a broad range of topics regarding cybersecurity, sustainability, supply chain management, plus much more. For more information and to get into contact with us, visit us at arcweb.com.
Welcome to today's episode of the Sustainability Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of sustainability and the energy transition, exploring the innovations and challenges that shape our future. I'm your host, Jim Frazer, and today we have two very special guests with us from Schneider Electric. Elias Panasiuk, EcoStruxure Power and Process Execution Director, and Thomas Kwan, Vice President of Sustainability Research. How are you, gentlemen?
Doing excellent. Thank you, Jim.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jim.
Well, gentlemen, let's just jump right in. Can you share your perspective on what's important in industrial automation and the current discussion around energy, and more particularly the energy transition itself?
Well, thanks, Jim. I think that's a great question, and it's important to keep, the real big picture in mind around the energy transition. And when I think about that, I think about the cost of renewables and how they've been falling rapidly over the past 10 years. So, for example, the cost to produce electricity from wind has fallen by 70% over the past 10 years, and even more so from solar, to the point where energy production from renewables is the least expensive form of producing energy in 2/3 of the world today. So this leads us to having electricity as the underpinning source of our primary energy, right? And this is important for industrial automation because this gives more attention to electrification, not only for our operations, but how our business ecosystems are connected. And this is quite significant. So when I think about the state of industrial automation today, this is then marked by significant advancements in technology. And this is emphasized by things on efficiency, on flexibility, and then of course on sustainability. But when we say sustainability, I would say it's beyond just the environmental perspective, but also it's more of a holistic perspective that would include business views as well, right? So these trends would include the integration of smart systems, including AI, autonomous robots, right? And there's a growing importance on digital solutions and interconnectivity, right? So I think all this picture I just painted is transforming manufacturing and the adoption of automation across all kinds of industries.
Yeah, those are great points, Thomas. And just growing from that a little bit, we see, as you mentioned, the cost of producing power, whether it's through renewables or even some of the diversification that's happened on the grid side. As that has gone down, we see the inverse in terms of technologies that allow for producers to then charge a premium for their product, whether that's hydrogen that's produced through renewables, steel that's produced through renewables, other industries that are taking advantage of this. So you have a really interesting business climate where, again, your input costs have dropped, though there is, of course, a cost to adopt technology. But then again, the outcome or the product that's coming out is charged at a premium. So that's really been driving a lot of momentum in this space, and I would say a bit of a rush in terms of, well, who can produce the fastest, who can get online as quickly as possible, and then manage their production as they go through various phases. And as you mentioned, Thomas, the importance of being able to balance the production demands from an automation system against the electricity demands that are coming from an energy management system or from that microgrid that's powering things. We also start to think more in terms now of an electron supply chain and what that really means in terms of outcomes, positive outcomes from a production standpoint, where, even 5-10 years ago, a lot of the sort of attitude in the market was really more around electrons as a utility, We build our plant, we plug it into the grid, maybe we build a cogen facility, and we produce. So not necessarily thinking about some of these nuances and, again, the business opportunities that come out of that.
Well, gentlemen, clearly it's a very dynamic environment and ecosystem with change happening at a very rapid pace. What do you see as the main opportunities and benefits of the energy transition, especially from a sustainability aspect?
Absolutely. There's, as Thomas mentioned, sustainability goes much further than just the environmental impact, which is, of course, very important and something that the responsibility is on all of us as production companies to articulate both to the market and to our end customers. But when we think about opportunities, going back to your question around energy transition, as I already mentioned, some of those business drivers that are happening, we really see that interconnectivity of electrical data, system demand data, your production data, and traceability of that production. As we mentioned, things like green hydrogen, green steel. Well, the producers need to prove that that's how they were able to manage their electricity. So reporting and visibility becomes extremely important. As well, thinking about the integration of information from those process control networks and from those electrical networks, it's also about exposing opportunities. We might have an example where customer is looking at a weather forecast, they're looking at their production forecast. Maybe it makes more sense, instead of ramping up production where they have an opportunity, maybe they sell some of that power. Maybe they store some of that power because our weather forecast is saying, hey, it's not going to be windy next week, or we have an opportunity. So again, that more dynamic control and enterprise situational awareness really comes into play here, again, as we bridge those worlds and break down those traditional silos between our electrical system and information coming out of that, as well as the grid demands, and then, of course, our process control system, the demands coming from that for production.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when, because electrification is connecting us in ways through our energy flows. It also connects us in our data flows and our business flows, right? And that interconnectivity gives us those, I would say, new value propositions, those new opportunities that we are, gives us new, I would say, business and operating models, right? And these are just starting to come online, starting to be realized, right? And there's advantages to adopt those technologies and get into those white spaces, right? So I think about it, it's like there's been technologies and movements from, I would say, the traditional sustainability lens, right? Like our goal is to reduce carbon or have better stewardship of the environment, right? And maybe over the last, say, 20, 15 years, that may have been KPI 1 or the driver towards those ends. But we have hit a tipping point, actually, where all the fruits of that labor have really driven the technology where we can actually say it's now just better technology where, right, these connectivities and these efficiencies are driving cost reductions and, like I said, new business opportunities, right, new operating and business models that are quite attractive, whether or not environmental stewardship is on your KPI list or not. So it's those tipping points that are quite interesting in today's markets, and I think that's what certainly this decade, in these years that we're looking at these business environments, right? How do you operate that? Or are you relying in the past, 5 years of your experience to make decisions, or are you looking forward and seeing how it's changing and how it's evolving, and will you take advantage of that?
It's clear that electrification is a major theme in the energy transition. Can you explain for our audience why it's so important and how it relates to sustainability goals?
Yeah, absolutely. Schneider, for a long time, we've been talking about the integration of digital and energy and what that really means for sustainability as an outcome. So when we think about those hard targets that customers are trying to meet, and again regulators are driving as well, when you electrify a process, really one, as already mentioned, you have to pay attention to where are those electrons coming from, because if we're burning coal to electrify, there's not a net benefit from a sustainability standpoint, but certainly the need to reduce carbon emissions, improve that overall energy efficiency, and transition fleets to cleaner energy sources are really big drivers around that. And when I say fleets, we could think of there was just an announcement this morning from a mining company in Australia that they're going full electric with their fleet of trucks and excavators, bulldozers, material handling units, and things like that, or just the industrial machinery. Whether we're in manufacturing and we're thinking about the actual machines that are crafting, taking the raw materials and then crafting steel or other raw materials to then be converted for other manufacturers, things like heat pumps, boilers, anything where we have a lot of pressure and or a lot of temperature that needs to be managed. The question becomes, well, can we do that more efficiently with an electrically driven process rather than a fossil driven process? And that really goes back to some of the previous points again, where now the connection between what's happening in my energy network, what's happening in my production network, those have to be linked because now you have a lot more variability in terms of when and where you would be running those units.
Yeah, I think there's a lens that we think about it certainly from our manufacturing and our industrial automation box, right? And all these things are advantageous and we love it. But when you go up in the plane and take a look at the 30,000 foot view, we're not the only ones looking at the electrification play, right? When you take the systems look as well, everybody is also considering electrification and how does that play, right? And it links into the discussion we're having is like, oh, it's actually quite linked together. So from the energy perspective, you think about, okay, there's a supply lens as well, right? How are we supplying the energy? But there's also how are we using it and what's the demand of that energy as well. It plays into the flexibility discussion, but also about what's the useful energy that we are talking about, right? Now, when you think about the round trip of your energy, there's all kinds of losses along the way. We'll say for traditional energy, right? Your coal, your oil, your natural gas, right? So their efficiency, right, after you do your conversion losses and your losses along the processing, right, you lose a substantial amount of energy. But when you take, say, electricity, and especially electricity from renewable sources, you lose much less of the energy. So I'm talking about useful energy. So from the use side, if you look at it kind of back the other way rather than the supply side, you could clearly see over the last 10 years that electricity, I would say, is like it's the king of useful energy. By far, if you start to measure what is the most useful energy the world has in play, it is in fact electricity, easily. Over the last 10 years, it's electricity, number one. That's the most useful energy. I'm not talking about what is supplied, right? I'm talking after all the losses and everything. What do we actually use? It's definitely electricity. So then from that lens, right, it's definitely advantageous to think about the full systems impact. There's many regulators, right? There's many state actors. There's many stakeholders along the system that are looking to take advantage of that simply because when you start to adopt that, it's inherently more efficient and gives everybody along the value chain, right, much more incentive to pursue those technologies based on electrification, whether or not it's, say, heating, motion, or what have you. Everybody immediately gets a benefit for just jumping onto the electrification bandwagon.
This has been great foundational information, but let's turn to application stories. Can you cite some compelling examples that illustrate both the value proposition and the impact of electrification in practice, perhaps with a focus on industrial settings?
In different industrial sectors. We've been working with a number of different companies who produce batteries. which, obviously there is a tremendous amount of energy that goes into the production of a battery, from the extraction of the raw materials, moving that product around, obviously building the battery itself, and then shipping that to the end user. So we had a challenge from one of our customers, really, of, okay, here they gave us their process, and with their various input points from a carbon perspective and the business opportunity points of where their supply chain was. And the challenge was, well, how do we, as a factory building these batteries, convert this whole value chain to run primarily on renewable energy sources, and where can we take advantage of underutilized renewable production sources? And what I mean by that is this is a company that has access to parts of the grid that are powered by hydroelectric power, which of course not just wind and solar, right? Water can, certainly helps with this decarbonization and electrification aspect. But again, these were underutilized. These were older hydroelectric facilities that were feeding factories that are long since gone. And so really what we took a look at was then, okay, where can we island some of the production into different units, and then streamline some of the supply chain steps to really minimize the amount of carbon intensity and land some of this closer to things like a major port. So the cost of transportation to that end user, whether that's the hard dollar cost or the carbon cost, the electricity cost, et cetera, is minimized. So really sustainable production processes and alignment with the goals that are in their market, that are set by regulators, and going back to some of our earlier points, also a competitive edge, because they've dropped all this carbon out of their chain. So that's, one example of where we're seeing this. Another area, you could probably tell from my accent that I live in North America, and there's been a lot of investment in both hydrogen, as Thomas mentioned, in ammonia with hydrogen. And what we're seeing is a big trend in smaller scale or industrial scale facilities, but landed at or connected directly to the end user off-taker. And so again, with being able to build renewable power grids, we can then build a hydrogen, again, with water rights, find a river, find the right water rights, solve some of those challenges. But instead of having either a long supply chain or having all those losses in the system, as was mentioned, getting that as close as possible to the off-taker, whether that's aerospace, green steel, et cetera. And so we're not just then reducing through electrification our process variables and the amount of energy input into producing, say, a kilogram of hydrogen, but also, again, those downstream emissions that happen just by transportation, things that often don't get considered as scope during a design phase, but can have a huge impact down the road. These are just a couple of examples, but you can pick almost any industrial sector, whether that's mining, chemicals, et cetera, and you'll see these different examples that are now starting to move from ideas and really into execution, and again gaining that competitive edge through that tight integration through that whole planning process.
Well, Elias, as a follow-up to those thoughts, let's dive deeper into manufacturing specifically. And can you describe how digital technologies like automation or AI or IoT are being leveraged to improve efficiency and sustainability of production processes?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen not a new trend in the industry, but I would say a convergence of pain when it comes to integration of various OEM equipment. Our customer might have a compressor from one manufacturer that has its own control box or its own PLC that's running it. They have a control system from Schneider Electric running the overall plant. Other pieces of equipment that are coming in with different either standards or different types of hardware to run those individual machines. So flexibility becomes extremely important in all of that, and also taking into account that numerous facilities in this electrification space are going through phases with this, not necessarily doing it all at once, say on an older facility, but they'll do a phase at a time. Integrating between all those various pieces of equipment becomes extremely important. Synchronization across different aspects of a plant or a manufacturing facility. And minimizing the amount of complexity of adding extra hardware to accomplish this. So the way that we've addressed this is really through our software-defined automation platform, by decoupling the control aspect of software from the hardware aspect, and then really opening up to, again, other manufacturers' hardware, even non-traditional control hardware like an Ethernet switch, a small edge computing device where we can land either some of the communications or optimization, other control algorithms. All of that can then be done at the edge and turns into something that, one, is simple for our customers, and as previously mentioned, allows that modularity. That as things change, as equipment gets replaced, you've got a system that can evolve alongside of that exact facility. And certainly the value coming out of that is one, is around that synchronization, getting all the data in the right place, in the right hands of the right users, but then taking it one step further, applying a simulation around all of that, of what's an ideal state, or what can we learn from either a good example of production or maybe a production issue that we want to eliminate, and then applying that to optimization. Whether that is, again, running at an edge on a specific piece of machinery, or looking at an overall supply chain optimization when we start thinking about, again, the raw products that are going into that facility, all the way out to transportation aspects.
So with both of your extensive experience in the industry, what recommendations do you have for senior leaders and other professionals in the world of sustainability? Sure.
So actually, I think maybe I have two, Jim. One, I'll kind of bounce off of what Elias was saying, and it relates to AI and IoT and all these, emerging technologies and new ways of considering our operations and our plants, and really even our business and our operating models. And there's so much buzz around AI, right? I mean, Google AI, how many hits will you get, right? Google's worth, okay? It's this. AI, of course, it's a tool, right? And there can be certainly some negative connotation about what does that mean for me and my business and the people that are in my firm that I'm looking after, right? And there's certainly the human aspect, the human component that cannot be replaced, all right? It's still the people, it's still us that set the vision, that set the values, and set the goals of what's happening. We still set the business flows, we still set, right, what's happening through those information flows and those mass flows that we were talking about earlier. We set that. And then we leave it to, right, the software-defined automation to tell us what's happening within those boxes. All right, so that's the tool. It helps us with the engineering efficiency, the automation efficiency, okay? So the people component now actually becomes much more important because we are defining the game. It's the automation that's just helping us get there quicker, right? So it's that tool. So that's one perspective I would add. And the second would be to anybody maybe working in, I would say, the quote-unquote sustainability field, perhaps has been in it in the last 8 years or so. You may have noticed the pace of things were a certain way over the last 20 years, and they have possibly, you've seen it change over the last 5 years a bit different. So to put it in perspective, it's taken 10 years for the first $1 trillion to be invested in clean tech. All right, 10 years for $1 trillion to be invested in clean tech. It's going to take just a little less than 4 years for the second $1 trillion to be invested in clean tech. And the trend will continue to be more investment in shorter periods of time. So what I would say to people in the sustainability field is, if you think it's picked up the pace over the last 5 years, buckle up. It's only going to get faster.
That's a great point, Thomas. And I would just to add to that, thinking about how quickly the industry has moved, to your point, and how many different players are now at the table, from companies or producers that have been in business for hundreds of years even, to brand new startups in these spaces. And what we're seeing as a key success factor is a customer, or even for ourselves at Schneider Electric, a willingness to collaborate and really fostering collaboration with other companies. Sometimes that means competitors, industry associations, research institutions, public-private partnerships. There is a wealth of information and also opportunity in the form of government support, funding, certain banks that have specifically earmarked funds to invest in this space. There's a lot of opportunity there, but it doesn't come without that level of collaboration and really being able to think outside the box, think differently. That's, again, going back to energy as a supply chain input versus energy as simply I plug it into the wall and it works. And the second point that I would make is really advocacy on behalf of the workforce. So as Thomas mentioned, the human aspect is extremely important. All of this technology that we've been discussing is great, but if no one can use it, or no one believes in it, or no one wants to change, well, then you've got a real problem. And so training both employees and also business leaders on sustainable practices and technologies, and as we get into some of that collaboration, as I mentioned, really running awareness programs about, well, what's the benefit? Why are we doing this? What's the importance of this? And how can an engineer, a business user, an operator, a maintenance person, anyone that's touching that equipment, that's touching the business around it, how does it make their job better? And once we can really boil that down, then the technology really starts to emerge of what is the right size solution and what is going to make the most sense to solve those specific problems.
So, gentlemen, before we close today, do you have any final thoughts or other key messages you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, Elias, Jim, I would say the last final thought to wrap this up is we've talked a lot about the interconnectivity of where we're at now, and just looking to tomorrow, it seems like that's going to continue, and all the benefits that unlocks. The one thing I would add is that those ecosystems are very important, and we can't realize those benefits if everybody's operating in siloed systems, right? So having those open systems become very important. So things like open automation platforms are critical to really realize those benefits. So open standards, open platforms, open automation, something that is actually beneficial not only for the industry, but also for your firm and for your business. So that would be my final message on this podcast for you, Jim.
Great. So, gentlemen, if listeners would like to learn more about Schneider Electric, this particular topic, or connect with you personally, what's the best way for them to do that? Can you share some contact details or relevant links to related content?
Sure thing. It's Elias here. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this topic. I'm passionate, not just because it's my job, but I'm passionate about it. And again, really getting an understanding every time we have an interaction with a customer, with a partner, we learn more. And I hope to do the same for others. So please reach out to me. My email address is very simple. You'll see my name in the description of this podcast. And my email address is simply elias.panasiuk@SE, S for Schneider, E for electric.com. I won't spell out my entire name here. We don't have time for that. But no, again, I'm really, really happy to spend some time with you here today, Jim and Tom, and of course with our customers, and look forward to speaking with you.
Great. Well, once again, today on the Sustainability Podcast, our guests were Elias Panasiuk, EcoStruxure Power and Process Execution Director, and Dr. Thomas Kwan, VP of Sustainability Research. We hope our listeners have enjoyed this episode. We thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again on a future episode. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks a lot, Jim.